Greetings, adventurers. This is DM Kurt, and I asked online. I said, "Hey, 5e DMs, if I were to come to your table, and the character race and class was allowed, and within your normal character generation parameters, but I said, hey, I want to make this character, and it only has one arm. It's missing an arm. What would you ask me? What would be your response?" And I got like over 500 responses, and so I had to kind of trim them down or collect them all up in the old notebook here. So I was asked things like, "Is this about handicap representation?" Uh, no, no. I simply have an ID, and it happens to just have this one thing going on in addition to what else it has going on. Uh, if you're a fighter, how are you going to make up for loss of shield or inability to use two-handed weapons? By and making yourself weaker hurts the party. Well, because this is 5e, there's a lot of things you can do, and the class I have in mind is pretty good, and the difference should be fairly minor. It has, you know, shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to say, hey, I'm just going to use a one-handed weapon, like a warhammer, longsword, that sort of thing. Maybe a mace, whatever. And so I don't have a shield. Going to have to come up with some other way of getting a good armor class. If you're a caster, I'm not playing a caster. My idea wasn't a caster. This conversation went a distance. You can actually cast spells in 5e with just one hand. Except Burning Hands specifies, you kind of put out this two-handed sheet, but most of them, they don't. And you only need one hand. Perhaps you have a spellcasting focus, a wand, and then there's the Warcaster feat, and there's all these other things you can do. And that conversation went a distance, and some people got a little uncomfortable with each other. Is this for aesthetic only, or would you want a mechanical effect? Now, that's a perfectly good question. If I was the DM and a person came up to me, if I'm the player doing this, either way, I would want there to be some mechanical effect. I'm not going to totally cripple the character out, but you can't use a two-handed weapon with only one hand. You can't use a bow. You can't use two-weapon fighting when you only have the one hand. Logically, and there's some things like climbing a ladder, you're going to be a little slower doing it, or you're going to have a higher difficulty if there's a difficulty roll. I would want some kind of a challenge, because I like having a bit of a challenge. What's the backstory? Yeah, I'll get to that. Some people are saying, do you want me to work it into the upcoming story? This is kind of that's up to us. That's something we can decide. I don't want my character's situation to be like the main focus of the entire group. That is hogging the spotlight. But we could address it at some point. Sure. Have you learned to master talents without an arm? Yes, I'd say for this particular character, it's been long enough to make do as best as reasonable. Is it gone or replaced with a prosthetic? Okay, a lot of people ask, do you want theoretical regeneration or magical prosthesis? Okay, I find this interesting. The 5e DMs are like so immediately going to go with, do you want a prosthetic arm? Okay, we're kind of playing more of a medieval-ish, but magic-ish kind of thing. And you immediately go there. Okay, I mean, if you have a game where Warforged are an allowed race, where artificers are a thing, then yeah, that is something that could totally fit. Anyway, why would you want to play such a player character? Why would you want to do that? Because there's a character idea that I want to work with. What's the rest of their backstory? Okay, fine. I'm going to make a short little backstory. I think more than half a page is a little much. I think if you can't do it in half a page, try to trim it up. Is it the goal to get the arm back? Okay, so that is an idea. That could be part of a short character arc, as part of that is shoehorned into the overall campaign. There were several versions of, so when can you start? That's the question I'd ask. Uh, right or left, and how high is it amputated? Okay. How do you want the PCs to react to this character? What challenges does that character face, and how do they overcome them? Why is the arm missing, and is there fuel to drive dramatic conflict for the character? That's a well-written one. What if the party objects to taking this character into a dangerous situation? Well, the character I have in mind, he would probably say something like, "With one arm, I'm still bigger and meaner than you are with two." This is kind of the character thing I'm doing here. That's a cruel disadvantage. Do you want to discuss an advantage to offset it? I mean, if you're just going to say, give me a free feat or something, or a free magic item in exchange, I'm not going to turn that down, but I'm certainly not asking for it either. I'm just saying I want to do this one thing if it fits. If you're going to allow Warforged, and if you're going to allow Barbarians. Do you want that to be a big part of your story? That's kind of something, That's kind of an idea. So I was just asking this question, about what if you brought a character with one arm, because there's always these things of what about handicap representation? What about characters who are in wheelchairs? Yada yada yada. And I've been watching these Tulok the Barbarian with that extra R, videos where he has his audience suggest cartoon characters, a lot of anime characters, superheroes, etc., etc. Can you make Batman in D&D? Can you make so and so in D&D? And I'm like, wait a minute. If I look at the old Judge Dredd comic books, okay, Judge Dredd, Mean Machine Angel was, I thought, an interesting bad guy. Okay, he was kind of dumb, he was kind of savage, but he had a bunch of cybernetic implants. He had a tendency to rage. He had one great big clawed arm, and it was huge, and he hit people, and he was missing his other arm right there. A big old metal skull plate and a dial from 0 to 4 to how enraged he was. And I'm like, I could easily make that in D&D as a Warforged Berserker Barbarian, and maybe start that character out as, say, chaotic evil, with the intention of doing a redemption arc where it becomes, goes into chaotic neutral, goes into chaotic good, eventually going from evil to good, maybe not ever really getting that distrust for the law, but kind of starting off with a character that works into an alignment redemption arc and is yet kind of brutal and ugly and learns to become something different. But that was my idea for a character I had in my mind, and I did not specify that to any of the people when I'm pitching the idea of what if I wanted a character who only had one arm as a starter. And I thought that was a fairly interesting conversation. And those were some of the responses I got. There was a whole lot of people offering, well, if you start with one arm, can I replace it? How would you replace it? Would the character want it replaced? Yeah, sure, certainly would. But there was a handful that went, no, never start out with a disadvantage. If you start with a disadvantage, then you shouldn't even roll up the character. But they were a minority, quite a bit. Anyway, that's just some interesting thoughts. DM Kurt, out.